So I'm going to start because I think it's already late. And I'm going to start with Dr. Irene Walton, who is our colleague from the Association of Radical Midwives. Good. And apparently Andrea is not coming, but I'm going to let you introduce yourself because there's nothing in here that I can see.
Hello. Is he talking? Yeah. Right, well, I'm Irene Walton from the UK. I'm a midwife. I've been a midwife educator. I was at Liverpool John Moores University until I retired. And then because I can't give midwifery up, I am now the membership secretary for the Association of Radical Midwives. And for those of you who don't know the association, it's the ARM, and we are a small but quite dynamic organisation that is very into change and promoting change, supporting midwives, helping women, particularly with home births. We put a magazine out 4 times a year, and I brought the last 2 years, and please help yourself to a copy if you like. And we've also quite recently, we've made our position statement, our vision for midwifery. Unfortunately, I only brought one, but if you go on our website, then you'll be able to look at it. So I was asked, I stepped in for somebody, and I've been asked to talk about community midwives in the UK. So, Jane Cooper, a community midwife, has helped me write this, but she can't be here today. So I'm going to talk about why they exist, how they're educated and trained, how they're organised, the activities of a community midwife and communication systems. I'm sure that some of you, particularly the British midwives, are very familiar with this, but I'm trying to explain an overview for those of you who are not familiar with our system. Why they exist. This is an old photograph of a midwife doing antenatal education. Until the early 20th century, birth was always at home. Very, very rarely was it in hospital, and rarely by a doctor, mainly because the women paid for directly to the doctor or the midwife. And a midwife was extremely cheap, and that wasn't the only reason, and usually was the local lady, and they knew her very well. And she delivered them, their mums, their cousins, their sisters. And the midwife is a practitioner in her own right. I think that has to be clearly stated. And she has been so since the first Midwives Act in 1902. If you want to know the definition of a British midwife, you can look at the WHO or the FIGO definitions. She fulfills these, and she's registered by the Nursing and Midwifery Council of the UK. That's NMC for short. As I say, at the beginning of the 20th century, birth in England and Wales, Scotland, Ireland was mainly at home. But from about 1970, there was a report, the Peel report, and it advocated that all births should be in hospital. And it's interesting the way when a doctor makes a report and advocates something, it's certainly taken on very quickly, sometimes against all the evidence. So it has been mainly in hospital, but now, more and more women are choosing a home birth. So we're very optimistic. It's never died out, but it's getting a bit more common. Education and training of midwives in the UK is university-based. And entry is from age 18 onwards. And because the universities have got a non-discrimination policy, you can be quite old as well when you start midwifery education. There's no real upper limit. Some universities do a 4-year programme with longer holidays, but most of them are doing a 3-year programme. It's 50% theory, 50% practice. The practice takes place in hospital, community, birth centres, and sometimes now with independent midwives, but that's quite rare. When she qualifies, she's awarded a joint qualification. She has a BA Honours, I think that's like a baccalaureate, and a BA Honours degree from the university. But she's also a registered midwife, and she gets a registered midwife qualification from the NMC. So she's dual qualified. And this is very important, really. She's competent to practice in her own right at the point of registration. So if she wants to, and some midwives do, she could go into independent practice as soon as she qualified. Most people don't, but it's perfectly possible. She's also accountable for her practice as well. So being a practitioner in her own right, she really does stand and fall by the decisions she makes. She can work in any setting, home, birth centre or hospital, and there's no extra formal training for the community. So if you wanted to, or if you go straight into the community, you don't have to have any more qualifications. Some places do a little bit of an induction course. All midwives have got to do mandatory training every year and do all sorts of things. Some rather strange at the moment, I think. Well,
come and tell them.
Well, yeah. Jane, the community midwife, was telling me that her latest 2 mandatory trainings were, the first one was pressure sores.
What?
Pressure sores. Pressure. You know.
Sores on your...
Yeah. So common in midwifery, aren't they? And the second was terrorism. How to recognise terrorists.
What about Ebola?
That's probably next week. Not quite sure what you do when you family, but anyway. The sphere of practice. She's qualified to give antenatal, postnatal and intrapartum care and advice to the mother and baby and family planning advice.
Can I just ask, sorry to interrupt, so when the students, when they finish their program, how do they feel? Do they feel confident to go and work in community or as an independent midwife, or do they feel they need a bit more training in the hospital and that, I know that some birth centers, they like to take the new graduates and they provide good support. So
I would say that the vast majority of people, they will work in a hospital or a birth centre and they'll undertake a preceptorship, which is a supporting system. However, I do know that some midwives have gone straight out into independent practice, but the bulk of them, they have a preceptorship.
So
it's not a training, it's a sort of support system.
Yeah.
All aspects of normal childbearing are within her scope of practice, but she must call for medical aid if complications arise, or maybe just inform them. It depends on what they are, but once it goes out of the normal, she has to inform medical aid. She educates and trains student midwives. So she works closely with the university, acts as a mentor, assesses them in clinical practice, and obviously she has to maintain contemporaneous and accurate records. That's very important. How community midwifery is organised. The bulk of it, over 90%, I would think, is in the National Health Service, where the hospital and the community midwifery is an integrated service under a head of midwifery services, and that head of midwifery services is a midwife. So all the midwives in that area are actually under her, and it's just an integrated, joined up service. Teams of community midwives are based at the local health centres. How they work I'll come to shortly. And then you've got non-NHS midwives who can work in group practices that are contracted or not contracted, and independent midwives. The group practice midwives have a caseload of women, and independent midwives usually book women directly and work from their own home. The antenatal care she gives, she books women in their own homes or local antenatal clinics. The women can actually refer themselves directly to a midwife. And then she helps and supports women to make choices and birth plans. It's very important that she supports women and gives them options. It's part of her responsibility to give women informed choice. She takes blood for screening tests, and she liaises with the hospitals to book scans and other tests for women. She carries on, she monitors the pregnancy, and she gives ongoing care. She undertakes vaginal examinations as necessary, if they are necessary. She educates and refers for public health issues. It's coming up on the back burner really now, mental health, domestic violence, all sorts of things she's giving education for. She teaches antenatal clinics in the local community on health education, diet, smoking, infant care, preparation for labour, breastfeeding, specialist classes such as for teenagers, and home birth information. Many community midwives actually run home birth information evenings for couples to give them all the information that they require. Then when the woman goes into labour, before she visits and assesses the home for birth, she helps the woman and advises her on preparation, such as acquiring a pool and all the bits and pieces that she needs to do or wants to know about. And then when the woman goes into labour, the midwife is on call for birth, and she travels to the home, and that's day or night. And various places in the UK have different ways of organising this. In the area I'm familiar with, they have 2 midwives on call every night. And if a woman calls them out, the first midwife goes out, looks after the woman throughout labour. When the birth is, coming up to imminent, the second midwife will come out, and that's how they work it. And they give emotional support, and it's so lovely. It's so lovely to have a home birth. Just writing that gives emotional support and pain relief. Sounds quite bald really, but just being in somebody's home and being the friendly face and sitting in their living room having a cup of tea is such lovely emotional support. And for the woman to know that the midwife isn't going to run out, she's not going to go into the next room, somebody's not going to pop their head around the door and shout, "We've got a section going, can you come?" Well, when that midwife is in that woman's home, she is the focus of care. There's pain relief. The people don't need much pain relief at home, they really don't. But what's on offer is TENS machine, water. Women very often now are hiring their own pool and having it in the living room and getting in and out as they please, if not in their own bath. Pardon?
Are you doing the water injections?
No, not that I know of, no.
I want to repeat the question, so.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I don't have the microphone.
I was asked, are we doing water injections for pain relief? and as far as I know, no. The midwife takes Entonox with her, and some places, Meptiv, it's an opiate like Pethidine. What do you call it in America? Demerol? Oh, sorry. Yeah, an opiate. Yeah. I'll come back to where they get that from in a moment. Oh, sorry, I'll rush. She monitors the labour and prepares for birth. This is off one of our magazine covers. It's one of our members having a home birth and with the cat on her back. She assists the woman to give birth in any position she chooses. I mean, I was asked that today, what position do the advocate? Well, actually, it's what the woman needs, what she requires. She delivers the placenta, generally physiological, possibly active management, and she gives initial care of the baby, and before she goes home, she makes sure that the mother and baby are well. So, this is a water birth. It's not come out so well on there, but this is another water birth. This is one of our ARN members, Kate, who lives quite close to me, having just had her 4th baby at home. What it doesn't show is their children all coming down in their pyjamas to meet their new brother. Postnatal care, she gives postnatal care. She has an obligation to go until 28 days, but in actual fact, that's very variable up and down the country, and they have visits. The number of visits is dependent on the well-being of the woman, supposedly. I'm being a bit cynical because actually it's being cut back and cut back. She makes sure that the woman and the baby are well. She gives care, advice and support. She does the screening tests, and then she discharges the women and completes their records. If there are any complications, she refers the woman to a doctor or arranges for her to be admitted to hospital by ambulance. In labour, at home, she'll call an ambulance and she'll accompany the woman. But most places, unless she's got a particular contract with the hospital that says otherwise, she will hand over care then at the hospital. I put a list here of the midwife's equipment. I won't read it all through, but those of you who are interested in it, I've got it on a piece of paper here, and you could perhaps get a photocopy of it. Those are the things that she takes. This is a delivery equipment, all sorts of things, a sterile delivery pack, gloves, catheters, all sorts. And when you look at the old-fashioned midwives going to a birth on a bike with a little bag, this won't fit in a bag. This is a photograph of it fitting in somebody's car. There's a pool there. And these are the drugs that are carried by the midwives in our area. Entonox. And somebody also asked today about Entonox. It's pre-mixed gas, it's not Entonox and oxygen. The Meptiv, Sintimetrin, lignocaine, oxygen and canakium. In our area they give vitamin K, intramuscular, there's been all sorts of pardon? Because only if they're doing active management, but that's quite rare really.
I thought even if active management that was obsolete, that you use oxytocin instead of sintimetrin.
Well, not where I'm coming from.
And you get vitamin K
Yes.
Because
That's why. Why? Because the paediatricians have organised it and said for most of the areas, but why they actually do it is a very debatable.
I think it's really hard to get oral people in England.
Yeah.
Well, we just break the vial and use it.
I know, I agree with you.
You can get oral vitamin K, but there was quite a big outcry from the paediatricians about 10 years ago, and you know it's really been back and forward, and this is the guidelines and policies. Right. Just to say about communication. The midwife, I think this is important for the foreign midwives that are not used to the UK system, that the midwives communicate and liaise with general practitioners and other health professionals. But she's an autonomous practitioner in her own right, and she doesn't work for any other professional. Her direct manager is a community midwife, who is a midwife, and her manager, the whole overseeing of the service, is a midwife. And when she needs support, there is a system in the UK, a statutory support system for midwives, which ensures that midwifery practice is safe for mother and babies, and it's a practical support system for midwives who want to develop innovations or who are troubled, because it was stated earlier, in England, a woman has a right to have a baby wherever she wants, and it may be that the midwife would need some support to go to certain ones. So that's, thank you.
Hi, thank you for the invitation. I'm Suze. I'm a midwife from the Netherlands, Holland, and I work for the Midwives organisation. If you think I'm going to be advocating home birth, I'm going to disappoint you. I'll be advocating choice. And I think that is the strength of the Dutch system, about which will be the main topic of my talk. Just quickly, we live in a very small country with a very large population, almost 17 million. We do about 170,000 births, and we have a ratio of midwives to obstetricians of about 3 to 1. Our home birth rate is about, well, it's dropping below that, but so I'll come back to that at another slide. It's lower than 23% at the moment. We have about 1.5% of women that give birth in birth centres, which is a new phenomenon in the Netherlands. And most of our midwives are community-based and work autonomously. That's about 2/3 of our midwives. And they work in independent practices, of which there are just over 500 in the whole of the country. Almost 1/3 of the midwives are hospital-based, and our cesarean section rate is about 15% at the moment. Now, the basic assumptions of the Dutch system are that pregnancy, birth, the postnatal period is a physiological occurrence, and it's a normal life event, something that's part of every woman's life. And the place of birth is a woman's choice. And the care given to a woman should be given by the right care by the right caregiver in the right place. This means that primary care is mainly given by midwives and GPs, general practitioners or family doctors, low-risk women, that the higher risk or medium risk women are cared for mainly by obstetricians and specialised and we have about 8 academic hospitals which look after women who need tertiary care, the very high-risk women. A few pictures of a midwife's practice in Amsterdam. In order to earn your full-time salary, you have to do 105 births per year per midwife. Most midwives work in 24-hour shifts. It depends a little bit on the size of the practice. If you're a one-woman practice, then you do 24/7. If you're with 2 midwives, then you have to divide the week, the 7 days of the week with the 2 of you. So it depends a bit on the size of the practice and the amount of midwives that you work with. And the community-based autonomous midwives, they do both home and hospital births. Now, what are the strengths of our system? I would say that the strength is choice. The women are able to choose whether they have their babies at home or in hospital, and this is part of the system. The place of birth also depends on the risk selection. I think we give high quality care. The women are very satisfied about their care. There was recently the results of the Deliver study were published, which still maintain that women are very satisfied about the care the midwives and the doctors give. And it's a cost-effective system. About the risk selection, we all know the occurrence of risk is a dynamic process. It may occur, you may realize that a woman is high risk at the very start of pregnancy. She might start off with essential hypertension, which means that she's already defined as a high risk, so she will be transferred to obstetric care. But it might also occur later on in pregnancy. She might develop pregnancy-induced hypertension. She might end up with a breech birth. The responsibilities are clearly defined. The community midwives, the autonomous midwives, do the low-risk births, and the obstetricians and specialised midwives are trained to look after the high-risk births. And in general, I would say that the collaboration between the midwives and the doctors is very good. There's no hospital that would refuse the referral of a midwife. And most, well, I'll come back to that later actually. So the risk selection is based on the obstetric manual that every midwife knows by heart, that every doctor knows by heart, and that is used and supported by everyone. It's being updated at the moment, causing lots of discussions. And they've already spent 5 years updating it on the last 4 subjects, and we're still not in total agreement about what it's going to be. However, but it's an ongoing process. The obstetric manual is divided into 4 categories. A is primary care, B is a consultation, C is a referral of care to obstetric care, and D is primary care, where the community autonomous midwife does the birth in hospital. So I'll give you a few examples. A woman who's had a previous premature birth after 33 weeks and is pregnant for a second time can remain with the community midwife to have the care, providing she delivers at term this time. A woman with severe anemia, she may be a B, so we might consult with the obstetrician to find out why she's so anemic and why iron suppletion is not working. If the problem is solved, she will remain with the midwife and she could have a home birth or a hospital birth, whichever she chooses. If the anemia remains very low and she has unfavourable living conditions, like she might live on the 3rd floor up without a lift or anything, so difficult to get out if she does have a PPH, the midwife might opt for a transfer of care during labour, but will still carry on doing the delivery herself. Pregnancy-induced hypertension clearly is a transfer of care. 24 hours rupture of membranes is also a transfer of care at term. Fetal distress, immediate change of situation, and a previous postpartum hemorrhage, which in Holland has a definition of more than a litre of blood loss, as opposed to in England, I think, where it is more than 500. Or a previous retained placenta with a manual removal. Okay. We believe sorry? Yes, of course you can.
So you and the obstetricians, you share one manual.
Yes.
Good. So there's no
it's a consensus.
It's a guideline for cooperation of practice.
Yes.
So, okay.
Yes. So it is. It's a booklet.
Yes.
And it has several chapters. It has something about ultrasonography. It has something about collaboration. It's quite an extensive document. And at the end, the most important part of it is the list with all the different indications. And we all agree, like general practitioners, midwives, obstetricians, paediatricians, anaesthetists, everybody has something to say about it. And we try to all agree of the medications. But at the moment it's a difficult process because they are encroaching on them. They want to change things, and that's why it's difficult to get the update. We believe our system is safe. An ambulance can be at a woman's home within 10 minutes. Most women don't live any further away than 30 minutes from a hospital, especially if an ambulance is used. As I said, all hospitals accept referrals. There's no discussion about referrals. If we phone, we have an emergency, they will accept our referral. And as Kenneth and Christine McCourt have already shown us this morning, there's plenty of scientific evidence that supported home birth is safe. Another strength of our system is the fact that we have maternity care assistants at our disposal. They support us in our work, they assist the midwife during birth, during the postnatal period, and they teach women how to look after their baby. They support the women with feeding, may that be breastfeeding or artificial feeding, and they're basically the eyes and ears of the midwives. It doesn't mean the midwives don't visit in the postnatal period, but they're not there every day, and they do not teach a woman to bath the baby. All that is the responsibility of the maternity care nurse. But if the maternity care nurse notices something untoward, she will call the midwife, and the midwife will come and visit. And regardless of that, the midwife will come usually more or less every other day and will spend 15 minutes, half an hour with the woman to see how she's going and to evaluate the care. Now, what about the money? All women have a mandatory healthcare insurance, and maternity care is completely covered. So all women will get their midwifery care reimbursed or their hospital care reimbursed. A midwife will get about €1,200 if she provides the full care to a woman. So that means if she gives antenatal care, interpartum care and postnatal care, that will get her €1,200. 1/3 of this is to cover her cost, and 2/3 of this is her income. Unfortunately, things are happening in Holland as well. Although I think we're listening to all of you today, I think we're still quite lucky, but all is not well in paradise. I'll translate a few of those newspaper headings for you. Don't leave the woman alone during labour. Pregnancy is a disease. Emergency care against babies dying. The Dutch system of maternity care is not safe, etc., etc. We've had a lot of bad press coverage over the past few years, and this was all the results of Peristat, a large European study about the outcome of birth. And we thought we were doing so well as Dutch midwives, but unfortunately our perinatal mortality rate was at the bottom of the table. It was with Peristat 2, which covered the figures of 2004, the perinatal mortality rate was 10.5 per 1,000 births.
You know why?
I'll come to that in a minute. So of course, you know, people who weren't happy with the system, they added 1 and 1 and made it 3. High rate of home births and a relatively high perinatal mortality rate. Well, hey, the system can't be very good. Home births must be unsafe. That was their only conclusion. And it's had its effect on our home birth rate. In 2001, 2003, we still had over 30% of home birth. And at the moment, as you can see, our rate has dropped to below 18%. So we're very worried that the rate might drop further. And there is discussion what's going to happen if the home birth rate drops below 10%, because that means that midwives are not used to doing home births anymore, that they're losing skills of doing home birth. And the argument is, if you lose your skill, and if you do less than 10% of home births, are you then still skillful enough to attend them? So what lies behind the numbers? A few things. some of it is comparing apples and pears. Different definitions within the, behind the numbers, definitions of prematurity, definition of, well, that was one of the main things. And you're comparing different systems, and it's very hard to make the numbers add up. Also, of the deaths that did occur, only 3% occurred at term, in the term pregnancies in primary care in the babies without any congenital abnormalities. And when you look at the numbers, most of the deaths occur in the women who gave birth under 37 weeks, so in the women who gave birth prematurely. Another thing in the Netherlands is that we treat the extremely premature babies very conservatively, whereas in other countries they may go on treating the extremely premature babies for a longer time than we do. We might say, okay, we'll abstain from further care and we'll allow the baby to die within the definition of the perinatal mortality rate.
You have 5 minutes, but I'm passing.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll be able to do it. And another thing is that before 2007, we did not have a routine ultrasound scan at 20 weeks, so we weren't picking up all congenital abnormalities before birth. And unfortunately, our women smoke a lot. So we started looking at the numbers, and of course we wondered why. What is happening in the Netherlands? Why aren't we doing as well as we thought we did? We were at the bottom. You know, we weren't even in the middle. So we looked at the numbers again, and well, this study has already been talked about today, which found there is no difference between the births that started at home. Again, first the hospital births done by primary care midwives. Another study done by one of my colleagues showed that the real emergency referrals in labour are very few, so only 4% need an ambulance with a blue light. And most referrals in labour are meconium stain like or more than 24 hours rupture of membranes. They're not emergencies, and you can go, you know, the women can go to hospital by themselves, in their own car, by a taxi, or whatever. But they are rising. In 1988, we had a referral rate of just over 36%, and by now it's 50% of women get transferred. So, most problems, and the most problems occur in the group that gets transferred. So we've been looking very carefully at how we can improve the care for those women. Sorry, but there's not enough information to assume a causal relationship. This study by Van der Kooi, there's been a lot of discussion about this. She said that most of the problems occur in the group with the congenital abnormalities, prematurity, low birth weight, and she added low APGAR score, which is a bit of an odd one out. And she said, and her conclusion was that if the risk selection was effective, then those things wouldn't occur, or they would occur only in very few numbers. But you could also argue the opposite. You can also say the midwives applied their risk selection very well because they picked the women who were at higher risk for those items. They managed to select them appropriately. And well, she said 25% of the big four outcomes is failed risk selection. And again, discussion about definitions, and the stats were from before 2007. When we still didn't have the routine ultrasound. So what have we been doing since the outcome of the peristat studies? They wrote nice big reports, of course, and we've put, or we're trying to, that's the aim, to put mother and baby more in the centre instead of the midwife and the doctor directing the care through the manual. It's more about asking the women what they want and how they see their care. it's a very hard process, and it's not happening with all midwives and all doctors yet, but it is what we're trying to achieve. There's a more proactive approach, more emphasis on prevention. All midwives and doctors join the local perinatal audits, so the cases where problems have occurred are discussed, and they try to find out which parts of the care could have been better. And it's all done according to very specific, very strict rules, which are aimed at making midwives and doctors feel safe. So it's not about attacking each other. It's not about saying like, why didn't you do that, but more about asking questions and trying to figure out which part of the care could have been improved, and would what has occurred, could it have been prevented, and how can we do it better next time. There's more attention to women from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, more care during labour. You may or may not know that Dutch midwives were known for coming into a labouring woman 4 or 5 centimetres, and we would still go away. In the 80s and the 90s, that was common management of labour. And I trained in England, and when I came back to Holland, I found that very surprising. But it was the normal thing to do. You would, a woman would call you in labour. You would go and assess her. If it was 2, 3 centimetres, 4 centimetres, 6 centimetres, a primary labour, you would leave and tell her that you would be back in 3 or 4 hours, unless she needed you. She would call you back, and you would go back earlier. But it's leaving them a little bit on their own, and it leaves them, women are scared, women are insecure, and they need a midwife, they need company. So we're changing this, or we're trying to change it. I also think that the collaboration between the hospital, even though it wasn't bad, it has improved considerably over the last years. They've set up regional organisations. There are monthly meetings, so that the collaboration has improved and is even better than it was before. We've introduced the routine ultrasound, and at the moment it's very hard work actually. They published another report. They've set up an organisation which is called the College of Perinatal Care. Well, what can I say? What they want is integral care, and everybody has their own definition of integral care. But what they ideally want is, we're very worried that we'll lose our autonomy. They want the midwives to come under the responsibility of the hospital, and they want they want the whole financial structure to change. They don't believe the midwives do the risk selection adequately anymore. So there's a lot of discussion about changing all that. And we're working very hard in order to maintain our autonomy. Parasat 3 has been published last year and does show that the perinatal mortality rate is improving. So we're not at the very bottom anymore, but we're going up a little bit. It's 9 at the moment. I want to leave you with my last slide. Losing home birth is not the problem, I don't think, but it's reducing women's the choice for women, which is the problem. It's important to give them informed choices within the realms of safety. And home birth is just one of those options that women like. That's it. Thank you.
So I am hoping, as I presume I just close this down. So these things are all going to be up on the web, so we have some ability to do that, because for these last 2 presentations, I think it would be really nice to have them. I know personally if I can't get them off the web, I'm going to be writing both of you. What I'd like to do is, first of all, I realized in my presentation I didn't actually talk about the, where's the slideshow thing here? I didn't actually talk about the Canadian data here. What I made a decision to do was talk about how in 10 short years, midwives went from being renegade, irreverent women, hippies, to integrated midwives within a healthcare system, and actually fairly well educated, so and respected. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about Canada first, because I thought it was fairly important for me to explain the context of what has happened in Canada. What I don't have here is our actual population, which is 35.5 million, and we have 380,000 births per year. Apparently, from about 2008 to 2011, has been the largest baby boom since the end of the Second World War in Canada. And that's a very interesting thing for us as midwives. The other thing is that in Ontario, which is the province that does over 50% of the midwife births, we have more midwives in Ontario than anywhere else, which is like about 700. The second province that has a high number is BC, which has about 224, I believe, midwives. In that population, we only do 10% of the births in Ontario, but 40% of women who want a midwife cannot get one, because midwives all are required to have hospital privileges, and if we don't have hospital privileges, we can't increase our numbers. So it's become a real problem, and one that the government is certainly looking into. So I just want to do an overview of what I'm going to talk about. So if anyone's going to take a picture of a slide, this is how we did what we did in 10 years, and these are all the influences. I'm going to go through them one by one, but this is basically the summary. It's that we are coming from, basically, we are a colony. We were a colony of Britain and France, and there is a lot of colonialism that we've had to deal with. In fact, nobody in Canada was originally there except the Aboriginal populations. And so at this point in time, we call our Aboriginal populations First Nations, or Inuit peoples, or Inuit peoples. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is the core values of Canadians, because I think it's quite important, and I think we had a bit of a discussion at noon today. I'm going to talk about the 1970s and the counterculture movement in the 1980s, and feminism, especially the difference between Canadian and American feminism, which is quite pronounced. I'm going to talk about our partnership with science and epidemiology, which just happened to be on a rise at the time when we were trying to go for legislation. It's been very useful for us. And our partnership with women activists and women's institutions, and going to women outside of midwifery circles, but who have a fair amount of clout with government structures in our society to get support from them. And then I'm going to talk about Canadians getting on home birth, which is quite robust and quite interesting. So, as I said, we've had many waves of immigration in Canada, and it originally started with the British and French, and then it was followed by other waves of immigration, and especially from Slavic countries. My grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, great-great-great-great-grandmother was a Russian midwife. My mother didn't speak English. She was from Ukraine, Poland. Her mother, at age 15, was sent to Pennsylvania to be wed to a coal miner, and we just found out 4 years ago that my two older uncles were not born to my grandmother, but in fact, well, they're born to my grandmother, but they were not the same grandfather that we had. And I was living up north, working with the Inuit, who all have these very shady pasts, because the Scottish and German whalers used to come and live with the Inuit, and they'd shack up for 2 weeks. And then they would sire population. So a lot of the Inuit have this German population. I'm working there, and I get this email in 2007 that says, it's a picture of my grandmother, and a man sitting beside her, and the subject line reads, "That ain't grandpa." So we have a very interesting history in Canada, and as I say, and this is a Czech-Slovak family, 1922, look at that, living out west in Canada. And we got quite a few Roma population people heading to Toronto just a few years ago as well. And this is how empty Canada is. Like the population, like this sparsely populated is the black. And what's really dramatic is when you see it at night. That's mostly the United States. Is this the, okay. So you see all along, this is where the Canadian border is basically. And there's the Great Lakes there, so it's right there. Okay. We're all huddled mostly along the American border. So that is what, that's what Canada is. I mean, we've got a population of 35,500, but we have a huge, huge geographical space. So, core values that we think is the good stuff is that we value our democracy and every citizen is encouraged to do his or her share. Equality, we respect everyone's rights. Everyone has the right to speak out and express ideas that others might disagree with. The midwives took full advantage of that. Governments must treat everyone with equal dignity and respect. Midwives took full advantage of that. And we have a socialist responsibility to take care of each other, which is very different from, as I say, our monster population to the south of us, the United States of America, which does not have universal health care coverage. And we borrow this from our sisters and brothers in Britain. The Canadians are known as the Empire Loyalists because we were the ones that left when the American Revolution occurred in the 1700s. We were the Loyalists who wanted to remain colonies to Britain. And every time I got angry with my younger sister when I was younger, I'd go and play God Save the Queen on the piano. So, multiculturalism, and very important in Canada. Multiculturalism is not a goal or destination. It is merely a fact of life, a recognition that immigrants bring with them different languages, cultures, and habits. It affirms the basic principle that everyone has a right to be themselves, to practice their religion, speak their language, and follow their customs. Midwives took full advantage of that. Generally thought that the U.S. emphasizes the melting pot as a national myth compared to Canada's preference for the mosaic, which means that the United States generally tends to think that everybody should become American, take on consumer American values, take on the values of, unfortunately, often the Republicans. And in Canada, we really believe that people should be able to have their own pockets. And that's partly emphasized in Quebec, where there was quite a reaction to being part of the British Crown. But also my grandmother, who came over to North America at age 15, never learned how to speak English. She was able to maintain her culture. I mean, is that good? That probably would not happen as much today, but people lived in a rural area at that time, and you could do that. This is the last slide on the good stuff, I think. So freedom. As Canadians, we enjoy basic freedoms such as freedom of thought, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, I'll go faster, peace. We are very proud of our nonviolent society, and our international role generally has been as peacekeepers. We are very concerned at the moment with what's going on with Harper and his government, who is our Prime Minister. But I should tell you that, I'll get quickly to one of the next slides. Law and order, we definitely respect that as well. But our belief in peacekeeping was so strong that not to go to Iraq, in spite of the fact that our American neighbors were trying desperately to get us to go. And I have to tell you that I was actually sitting on the Committee on Women, Peace and Security, and was one of the committees that strongly recommended to our government not to go to Iraq, because we also tend to have a fairly forward-thinking government, or we did, before the Conservatives got in. And we also had a lot to do with the UN Security Council Resolution number 1325, which is to put women in conflict areas at the table. So I actually spent some time in Afghanistan, and what I found was that working with this fellow up here with the cup, working with the Taliban judge in a very remote province, Nimroz, which is beside Iran, I could actually speak with him on egalitarian terms because he understood as a Canadian that I believed in very similar to the ideals that he believed in, believe it or not to do so much with women, but he did agree to pay these traditional midwives if they actually were doing something that was worthwhile. And we actually formed quite an alliance, because Canadians tend to think they can negotiate and cooperate and do whatever they need to do in a collaborative, polite manner. We've often said, there's a joke in Canada that we would love to take over the world, but we're too polite to do it. So more about Canadian values is really important. So the last bit is that we do believe in healthcare coverage, and this has to do with that belief in social justice and belief in our need to take care of those who have less than we do. And there's another very important thing for the midwives in that we believe in our ability to use our bureaucratic structures. And that is something of what happens, I'll get to that yet. That is part of the reason why, although our movement started in the 60s and 70s in North America, and in fact the movement in the United States of America was much faster and much quicker and much larger than the Canadian movement, we in fact got farther ahead in our movement in terms of legislation, because when we see something that we think we want, we just go to our local structures and we say, hey, this is good and we should do something about it. And so for us to discover midwifery, which we only were doing in the 60s and 70s because we didn't have it before, was not something, it hadn't occurred yet. So this is one of our deep blemishes, our deep shady history, is our residential schools, which many of you might have heard of. There's been a huge investigation into the residential schools. And basically what it was at one point in time, especially in the remote areas, the government of Canada made a decision to take all children that were Native children away from their parents and put them in these residential schools, and especially up north among the Inuit, where people were nomadic. The reason they all clustered close, they started forming settlements where normally they were following the caribou, is they wanted to cluster around the places where their children had been taken to. And there were terrible abuses with this, but you understand that the history of taking back birth is interconnected with taking back the culture robbed through the residential schools. So in the 60s, they also started evacuating all the women from northern areas for the benefit, quote unquote, of a hospital birth against the women's rights. They never really found out what the women wanted. And this is one of the quotes I had found from one of the doctors. He says, I have conducted an obstetrical clinic for the benefit of the old women in whose hands all obstetrical authority lies. Little impression was made, but the important fact is that some impression, no matter how superficial, was made. And then he says, like religion, it is true, they will shortly adopt the obedient attitude. So that was the colonial attitude of the physicians who went up north and robbed these women of being able to continue births with their own women. When I came up, I was trained originally by traditional midwives in Guatemala. When I came home to Canada, I was approached by the Inuit Women's Association to go up north and talk to the midwives and the elders up there, because they thought the dawn of the Renaissance of reason had occurred because the white women down south were starting to have home births. And this is me, like in 1984, interviewing a woman in Igloolik who's an elder, and forming an alliance with the Inuit Women's Association to bring back birth up north. There isn't actually an article in this book that I just lent you, actually, called Heating Warnings from the Canary Whale and the Inuit, and it's in this book by Robbie Davis, who's the editor, about our struggle to bring back birth to the northern peoples, mostly because the northern peoples have a different sense of what risk is and what kind of logic they need to use. They didn't look at science, they just looked at what was occurring to their own community, and they were willing to risk a baby death in order to maintain the integrity of their peace of mind of having jurisdiction over their own births. But even more than that, the feeling among the Inuit is if you are not born on the land, you no longer own it. And they felt it was a disguised conspiracy by the government to take away their land. So that has been some of this is why it's a whole colonial attitude and why the Inuit fought against it. And so we took up the charge with them in the 1970s, and this is what happened, of course, in Canada. This is me right here. No, but that's basically who we were, right, in the 70s. And what we did was we joined forces in this back to the land, back to nature, back to tradition, and we joined with our sisters and brothers in the indigenous populations right across Canada, but also into Latin America. And we adopted things like the squatting position. So So now I want to get to the feminist part of Canadian history of midwifery. And these things are all happening at the same time, right? I just want to talk about this movie. Do any of you know this movie, Violette? It was put out last year, 2013. You should all go see it. It's very interesting. So this is Violette Duc, who is one of the authors in the 50s, just after the war. She was taken under Simone de Beauvoir's, she's French, and so Simone de Beauvoir is one of the feminist writers in France. And what this woman did was she wrote about, for the first time, about her sexuality in a way that was so, it exposed her so much that it was very difficult for people to accept. But she also talked about how women, the perception of women is always that they're either ugly or they're beautiful. They're one or the other, and that is the essence of who they are. And that essentialism, which is the basis of the concern of feminists, is that we have to get beyond that. We should not be judged according to our biological imperative. We should not even have to have babies if we don't want to, because we do much more and can do much more than simply be a vessel for a biological act. And so what happened in Canada and Australia, and as I say here, the British colonies, is that we took up this charge in a major way in the 80s. And we talked about body politics, and we talked about how our bodies are either going to be a source of oppression or power. And if we're going to do that, then we're a source of resistance, and we are, instead of inscribing certain social things upon our bodies, we need to pick up the battle and decide that we are political resistance. So at the same time that this was happening, this is 1975 was the first UN conference on women. It was in Mexico. Then there was a series in Copenhagen, Nairobi, Cairo, and Beijing, finally in the 1990s. And this is when women from the global north picked up with the global south and realized that we are all under the same kind of oppression. And now these ideas are embedded in state bureaucratic structures through the UN. It's actually very good. There's a lot of things we can go to in the UN that can help and support our claims. And the reason I have this thing about Canadian feminists versus American feminists is this whole concern about the lack of ability in the States for us to really use the bureaucratic structures to change things. The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology is so strong. And why? Because birth is a medical business. You pay for it, they make a lot of money from it. And in Canada, you don't do that to the same extent. In fact, in Canada, the government is looking for a source that is actually cheaper, and they realized that midwives were cheaper, the women are more satisfied, and this was a good thing. So it was an innovative, cheaper thing to do. We've been trying to sell the same thing to the US, it's very hard. So the next step, where is Ken? Ken was supposed to be here during this presentation with me. Anyway, the other factor for Canadians is our partnership with scientific evidence. So we definitely, the Effective Care on Pregnancy and Childbirth was published in 1989. Our legislation was hovering around at that time. Our legislation came through in 1993. Ken and I actually went to spend time in Oxford. We put our 4 kids in school in Oxford, and we spent time at the National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit. I won't go into that too much because just to say that we were disappointed that they were only looking at randomized control trials at that time, when our belief is that actually randomized control trials are a very difficult thing to use with most things in obstetrics. They're better for drug-based studies. But here's the summary. Here is, so amid questioning of colonialism and cultural discrimination, amid the counterculture and feminist activism, amid the revolution in epidemiology, we have formed the midwifery that we are. And one little step that we made was this was a bit of more history, just that there was no real history of midwifery in Canada. The medical schools were very strong at the time that we formed our country, which was in 1867 officially. And so, the first medical schools were in 1800s, and women would come over and they would use their own immigrant midwives, but they would be in the rural areas. They wouldn't organize very well, and there was no social media. So nothing really developed around the midwives, except, and nurse midwifery had never developed as it had developed in the US in 1955. So in 1986, 1987, we had a task force that went to these countries which we suggested they go to, and we made a decision not to put the midwiferys on this task force, but in fact it was a lawyer and a number of different people who were interested in studying midwifery. And we went to these 4 countries. And which country do you think we chose as our, to emulate? Susan's actually gone to sleep. But it was the Netherlands because of our concern about what was going on in this US, which was there was this terrible dynamic between the nurse midwives and the midwives that were not nurses. And it's still true today in the States. The nurse midwives basically doing hospital births. They only do about 1% home births. And the other midwives do not have hospital privileges. So this is especially what we made a decision to do. It was discussed this morning, I'll just go through fast. We are required by law to attend a certain quota of home births and hospital births in order to keep our license, in order to prove that we are offering informed choice to women. Because if we're forcing them to do one or the other, then we are not offering them informed choice. We can certainly inform them, and I'll get to quickly the, and Ken talked about this, our philosophy of care, informed choice, continuity of care, choice of birthplace. I just wanted to show you this slide because this is something I picked up from the Dutch. They always put out a goose outside of their house after a birth, or a Dutch flag. Stork, okay. Yeah, but in Canada, I had to put out a Canada goose, right? So that's what this is, a Canada goose. And not only that, that says born at home on one side, the other side says né à domicile parce que je travaille à côté de Québec. In Quebec, you cannot use the English side. So that's what we do after every birth, is we put that sign up. That was me a few years ago. So all midwives have to have hospital privileges. So this is our statement of belief. This is what I'm going to end with. Women have the right to make an informed choice regarding their birthplace of birth. Planned home birth should be recommended for healthy, low-risk women. This took me a long time to bring to the Canadian Association of Midwives. But after our study in 2005, after the 2 Canadian studies came out, after studies from Holland came out, I stood up at the Canadian Association of Midwives and I said, okay, originally we were just offering home birth. Can't we now recommend home birth? And there was just silence in the room. And I said, we say that we are evidence-based. We say we offer choice to women. So this is just January this year. I was on this task force to create this recommendation. So it's a really good statement. It's on the web. I would look at it. The other thing is I really wanted to state that home birth protects normal birth. I got them to say women who plan home births experience reduced obstetric and neonatal interventions and a course of care that facilitates normal. Home birth protects normal birth because when you have a home birth, you have reduced intervention. That's the reality. But Canadians are quite conservative. They still want to go with, it'll take a few years, but it'll happen. And then it just talks about evidence. And finally, it is a midwife's ethical duty to remain with the woman and offer her midwifery skills in the home setting to the degree that the woman will accept care. And I have been doing a lot of breech births, but not at home. And I'll talk about that tomorrow. I really like this slide because I think this is what we have done in Canada, is we've transformed everything so that this is the original nursery, right? You have the baby in the house and all the neighborhood kids and everybody can come and see the baby. The mother's inside there with her baby, showing off the baby. But she's staying put in a nice, safe place, whereas everybody else with their germs are staying out. She doesn't have to go to the hospital to all those germs. And so finally, all midwives in Canada should provide home birth services. And I just also want to tell you, this is the Canadian Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario. Originally, 1994 till 2004, they had a position against home birth. But now they say, it states home birth for low-risk women is viable if not widely practiced option, that's what they say. It says a review in 2001 stated the need to recognize the scientific literature indicates that there is no compelling evidence either supporting or opposing planned home births for low-risk patients. And recently in BC, the physicians have, GPs have applied to actually do home births themselves. One thing I just wanted to say is I wrote a thesis called From Social Movement to Professional Project, Are We Throwing the Baby Out with the Bathwater? Because as we were going to legislation, I watched people getting more and more conservative. There's a woman here from Croatia who talked to me at lunch about how she went to something in Toronto and she was very surprised that some of the young midwives seemed nervous about doing VBAC at home. I said, we do VBAC at home all the time. But there is a conservative element moving in, and I will talk to you about it at some point if anyone wants to talk to me. But I actually got an abrupt wake-up call when a younger midwife put in a complaint against me because I was letting women go more than 0.5 centimeters an hour. They were having longer labors because I was pushing breech. I wasn't even doing it at home, but in hospital. And because I was doing pushing breeches, and there were a few other things like I let women, because I wrote in my notes that I took carrot juice to somebody and she thought that was unprofessional. It's just very odd types of things, and what I find is that women micromanage each other and we are our own worst enemy. And also that people who seem to take off to these positions of power in the organizations that tend to discipline midwives tend to be women who like to police other women, and we have to figure out how to live among each other in a way that we won't kill each other. And what happened was my community came up and supported me. All the midwives in my community, except this one woman who moved away as soon as she realized what was going on, she was voted off the council. The registrar who was trying to get rid of me mysteriously retired, and the person they tried to have testified against me was a British trained midwife who didn't believe in home birth. So there is really quite an interesting thing going on. Now we've been legislating for 20 years. And so I wanted to close with talking about the fact that we did meet with a group of home birth midwives in Prague just after ICM here, and that most of these midwives, I understood, were not able to actually go to ICM because they could not afford it. And I did feel really quite terrible when I realized after ICM that ICM did not help the Czech midwives in the way that we had hoped it would. And part of the reason I wanted to support Susanna when I first came here was to do just that. And I think that hopefully this particular meeting will do that instead, where the ICM failed. And as I said, people in positions of power tend to want to be as status quo and conservative as possible. That doesn't always work. And this is a picture in Afghanistan of women huddling. Women huddle all over the world. And Canadian midwives tend to work with NGOs. We tend to work with the traditional midwives. We put in a resolution to ICM to acknowledge our traditional midwives as opposed to relegating them to non-skilled practitioners, because we feel they have skills. We need to acknowledge those skills. And I think we do need to band together everywhere. So this is just a summary. You believe in following the core values of your country that connect with democracy and equality issues, which you seem to have in the Czech Republic. Just go for it. Go to your constitution and you will find the rationale there for suing your government, as your lawyer has talked about. Joining with indigent groups strengthens resolve. I would think that would even be with Roma people. I don't know. I just think it's with everybody here who thinks on a primordial level, on the ground, like our Indigenous people in Canada, who would not stand for the government taking away their land for beads. That's what they said to us in Porodní. We are not going to sell our land for beads, because that, do you understand what I mean by beads? Like jewelry. Because that's what the colonists did when they first came over. They tried to get the land from the natives by coaching them into things that were not rational. The other thing is hippies and people without ideas can stir the pot and make changes. Hey, why not? And feminist language of body politics and change is very useful. Partnership with science is critical, totally critical. You don't all have to marry an epidemiologist, but it has been very useful. Partnership with women is crucial, and never give up, because efforts resound around the world. And this, to me, is what you have to say to everybody, physicians, administrators, policymakers, everybody. This may be your comfort zone, but this is where the magic happens. Thank you. And also one more thing, I just want to say I do have some of these books for sale. We've got this chapter is in here. We've got a chapter around Japan and what happened after the war to destroy home birth midwifery there, unfortunately at the hands of the American College of Nurse Midwives. We have a chapter on in various places in the States, a chapter on Mexico, 2 chapters on Brazil, first chapter is on the Netherlands, chapter on Ontario, which is I talked about today. It's a chapter on Mexico and how CASA has brought birth back there. It's a lot of chapters about how to bring back normalcy to your country. So I think it actually could be useful. And now where do we go? I don't know what to tell you as a facilitator. Are we finished? Oh, questions. Do we have yes?
Oh, we need a mic.
Oh. Can someone take the mic? Hello.
Two for Suze. About the Dutch situation, and just 2 questions really. One is, having previously worked in evaluation at caseload midwifery, I'm not entirely sure what the Dutch midwife covers, but the caseload seems quite large. I mean, the studies that we did of caseload midwifery, which showed it to be very safe and effective, the midwives had a caseload of 40.
When I first started, it was 160.
Yeah, so this is, I wonder if there's been any discussion of that in the Netherlands?
There's constant discussion. Ideally, we'd like it to be at 90, or even lower, some say, but we're having a hard time. Economics of it isn't, we'd like it, but I think we're already very happy that we got it down to 105. And you'll find that a lot of midwives have limited themselves, but it means that they earn less money. So if you are prepared to sacrifice part of your income, you'll do less deliveries.
The other, I suppose, partly connected question is about continuity of care again. As I understand it, the midwife can't transfer with the woman if she needs to transfer to higher level care. And again, that was a feature of caseload midwifery that we evaluated, that the midwives can do all risk care, and they obviously work with the obstetrician for high risk care, and the obstetrician is the lead if the woman's high risk, but they don't have to hand the woman over. And there is good evidence that continuity of care improves safety. So again, I'm just wondering how much discussion
I completely agree with you. And as I said, I trained in England, and for me, I find it very strange that it's not possible and that there's so much opposition to it. There's not only opposition from the hospitals, but also from the midwives themselves. But we've created a two-tier system where you have the community-based midwives, and now we are sort of in the process of creating this other midwife that is a clinical midwife. You have to have an additional year of education in order to be able to work in the hospital. And we are discussing it, we're trying to discuss it, because we also see that it's that we're failing women because of a lack of continuity of care, because we transfer care and we drop them at the hospital. I'm putting it very black and white now. We drop them at the hospital and we say, well, good luck, and have your birth with the hospital, and the hospital midwives were leaving. And we've spent 6 months getting to know each other, and then we leave them in the lurch at the most important point. But we'll go with them if it's a very last minute. Like if it's fetal distress, we go with them and we stay until the baby's out and we know that everything is fine and blah blah blah. But if it's meconium state liker at 3 centimeters, it's a handover. We leave. The thing is that the clinical midwives don't like it either. They feel that if we would stay with the women, then what would they do? They've trained for another year. They've trained to look after these women with meconium state liker. So what is this community midwife doing with this woman, and what are they supposed to do? So it's kind of a bit of a tricky situation, but we are talking about it and we are thinking about it. It's the first step, but I do agree with you. It's not
I just quickly wanted to add one point to that, which is that after birthplace, we undertook a follow-up study of midwifery units in Britain, and it was a qualitative study. One of the things that came out from that was managers, senior professionals and the midwives having quite a strong view that they didn't want to arrive at that kind of situation because they feel that to be a good midwifery unit or home birth midwife, you need your normal birth physiological skills, but you also need high-risk skills and experience. So hence the value of the mixed caseload, because you're the person that has to make the decision about transfer and handle transfer if a woman does develop complications. So, and it may be, it may be a safety as well as an experience issue.
Yeah, I get your point. The thing is that I think they would argue in Holland that that's taken on board during midwives training, where midwives do, student midwives do spend some time in hospital looking after more complicated, higher risk women. The midwives are actually quite well trained in dealing with emergency situations and with an undiagnosed breach, etc., etc. So that's what they would argue, but I do also see your point.
I have a question for you as well. So I found it very interesting that your data showed that, and I didn't remember it from the study, but that you called it the emergency transfers were 4.4%, and it was in our study, in the BHJ study, which is across the United States of America and into Canada, our urgent rate was 3.7%, almost identical. But we made a point of calling it urgent transfer as opposed to emergency transfer. No, I think they do it in. I think you do it in Britain as well, right? Don't you? Do you call it emergency, or did you not bother doing that? I didn't read it. We're talking about emergency transport as opposed to transport because the mother is laboring too long, or you just want to go in because she wants an epidural.
In one of the further analysis papers that are looking at more,
in one of the further analysis papers looking at more detail on transfer, including transfer times, then we did do a classification. We didn't do it in the main birthplace report, but we looked at urgent. It's actually quite hard to, there isn't a fixed classification. The number of emergency transfers is very, very small. Yeah.
Any more questions?
How many midwives does the mother see during her pregnancy and her birth? So is it a continuously birth attendance with one midwife, or no? It's not one, but it's 2 or 3
No,
or how many?
it depends very much of the practice. Around 2000, when we had a very big crisis with a shortage of midwives, the tendency was for the practices to become larger and larger. So midwives were collaborating and trying to keep each other standing. And the practices were more sort of like 3 to 4, 5 women practices. So then women would obviously see more women during antenatal care, because the idea is that the women see all the midwives in the practice, and then the person who's on call will do the delivery. Now that is changing a little bit. We're training more midwives, and another result of the Peristat numbers and all the discussions about the quality of Dutch midwifery care, some midwives are beginning to realise that maybe we should look at things differently, and maybe it's better if women see fewer midwives. So there's a tendency at the moment for practices to become smaller again. So I would say that the average practice is probably about 3 midwives. So women will see 3 midwives during their pregnancy, and then the person who's on call will do the delivery. And depending on how that practice is organised, like some practices for the holidays will get a midwife from outside, a local midwife to step in. Others will cover the holidays themselves. Then in Amsterdam we have a system where if you have 2 deliveries at the same time, which is something that is not an unlikely thing to occur when you have practices of 300 to 400 deliveries a year, if you are 3 to 4 midwives, We call our neighbouring practice, and the saying is if you want a pair of new shoes, because the midwife will get paid extra and that will get you a new pair of shoes.
Thank you. And I would like to
And then, of course, if you then transfer care, then the people in the hospital will be unknown to the woman. So that's when you lose.
Can you go into the hospital also and stay there only, like, or you'd never do
that? You can, but it's
a time factor.
It depends very much on the hospital. It depends very much on the midwives that are on call at that moment. Some don't mind it, and some do. The saying of too many Indian, like too many chiefs. Like, they feel that they're watched, and there might be a conflict of management or whatever. And also, I'm sad to say, I think there are plenty of midwives in the community that are quite relieved that that's meconium at 3 centimeters, because that means that you can bill the full amount for interpartum care, you can go home and sleep. If you do 100 deliveries a year, or if you're in a 3-women practice and you do 300 births a year, then you're quite relieved that you can go home and sleep.
I would like to ask this question also, how is it in England with the community midwives, home birth midwives? How many, so when a mother wants to have a home birth, how many midwives will she have then?
Again, it depends on the system that's in place. Some places are trying to do caseload, so she'll have a fairly small number. Some places are doing, where I live, they're doing sort of located in the area. So there'll be a group of about 5 midwives doing a district, if you like, and they will be running the antenatal clinics and doing postnatal care. So it may be that the woman, although she could see 5, maybe 6, and then she could also have had her baby in hospital and seen midwives in hospital as well. So it's very variable. I mean, there are midwives organising like the one-to-one system where they do a caseload, and they would have just a buddy, so that the woman would have her own midwife and maybe her midwife's buddy. But as I say, the vast majority of people in the National Health Service will see at least 5.
In Canada, we're required to not have any more than 3 or 4 midwives for one woman. It's actually written into what we were supposed to do. And what we have found is that continuity is critical. We go into hospital. If she has a section, we go in because we are still the baby, taking care of the baby once the baby comes out, because we have to have continuity as primary caregivers of that whole dyad, mother-baby dyad. And what's interesting is I was recently asked to go to Chile to talk to in Concepcion, where they have the first university where they are really looking at primal care in the first 2 years. They believe that because the first 2 years are really critical, that midwives need to take care of children up until 2 years, and so they maintain that continuity, which I find fascinating. But the continuity of care issue for Canadians has become incredibly important now for the breech issue, because when I was just in Oxford, I found out that one of the reasons the midwives are not really taking care of the breech women is they aren't recognizing at the moment, because they don't have as much continuity, unless they are with radical midwives, unless they are independent midwives. There is not enough continuity of care. In Canada, we are so concerned about and so connected with the women in our community because of our continuity of care requirement, that when I have a woman who is breech, I need to go and help her with her midwife. I will never do a birth without that mother's midwife, and we do it together, and then she maintains that relationship with her midwife, and we do it together, but the woman really wants the continuity of care with the midwives, and she's traumatized because she's having a breech birth at 36, 37 weeks, and everyone else is telling her it needs to be a section. So it's the continuity of care issue that has helped me bring back breech to Canada. which is really an interesting, outcome.
There was another question here. Do we have time?
You tell me, I don't really know, as facilitator, I have no
You can
idea.
tell me if you want to
So
start.
if people want to lead, it's probably fine, but go ahead. We locked the door.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I think both Betty Ann and Suze, you both mentioned the need for more integration with midwives. Did I remind you something about integration?
Well, compared to before legislation, when I could not walk into a hospital with privileges, that was a problem, because now I can walk in and do that. But what's interesting about integration is the Quebec midwives have made a decision. They do not want to be so integrated that they have jurisdiction over a woman when she has an epidural. They actually made a decision that in order to save natural birth, that they did not want to be, they felt that they wanted to transfer care if the woman wanted an epidural. In Ontario, we don't do that. And what's interesting is they have fewer transfers, they have fewer epidurals in Quebec. The women realize that if they have to transfer out to get an epidural, they don't want to have an epidural. They want to stay with the woman. Sorry. I think the thing is, I wanted to find a social movement when I went to Holland, because I was writing this story for a Grade Degrees book on how places are different, and I went to Holland saying, is there a social movement here? And all the Dutch midwives said to me was, yeah, there's a movement to have epidurals.
Exactly, yeah. And the thing is, that doesn't prevent our women, but our women are different. The women who choose to have home birth in Canada, I think, are very different women, are very different to the women in Holland who choose home. In Holland, home birth is part of, like, it's normal. It's nothing funny. It's not a special. It's part of the culture. It's like, I don't know, buying vanilla custard. I don't know. It's like it's normal. So you have
Very
different
cool.
women.
The core value of a Dutch midwife is to have a cow in her backyard. And I thought,
Oh, okay. But like, and what else did I want to say? So we had this whole discussion about pain relief, and like, for a Dutch woman, if she wants pain relief, she doesn't care whether her midwife goes with her. I mean, she wants her epidural. That's her main priority, and who looks after her.
Yeah, I was thinking of it
We
more
have
in
to transfer
terms,
them.
more in terms of the fact that in the UK, or certainly in England, we've had what we call integration for quite a long time now.
But what do you,
Well,
I mean,
which
the
actually,
interesting thing
in
is
practice,
what's your
yes.
definition
In
of integrated
practice,
care?
that means that the community midwives and the who are obviously mainly responsible for doing the home births, and the hospital midwives are employed by the same employer, which is basically the hospital. And that's caused us a lot of problems now, especially for the community midwives, because there's one pot of money that goes to the hospital that has to cover community and hospital services. And when push comes to shove, which is, I suppose, apt for midwifery, it's the hospital always has the priority.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons that we don't want this.
That's right, and that's why my ears perked up when I heard about you mentioning integration, because beware that you don't.
No,
you
no,
become
we're very
more
aware.
integrated. I'm sure you're more
But so
aware.
are the hospitals and so are the doctors, because they realise there's money involved.
Yes.
You have to understand that, the bottom line of the whole discussion is not that what's good for women, it's about money.
But if you're not there yet, we are. And I've seen over my career that the problems with that system, the community services are getting more and more pinched at a time when the government's actually advocating more care in the community. So it's a real dilemma for us. I don't want you to go the same way.
No, we have the same discussion. The government says that the emphasis should be more on prevention. Care should go out into the community in all other areas except for care for pregnant women. It's going the other way, and it's a hard battle at the moment. We try and we do everything we can. But,
it's funny how how every country.
yeah, and what we're really missing, which I think is very sad. Sorry, one more thing. what I think is really sad and what we're really missing, and we are really looking in ways how to empower them and how to find women to support us. We don't have a very strong client or patient or women's lobby that is fighting for her rights. I mean, they're sleeping. I don't know. There's a very small group, and they are growing, but it's not enough. And if I believe that if the women would stand up, the government and whoever else can't do anything but listen. But at the moment,
don't realize what they have.
they don't realise what they have. I don't think they do. No.
They don't realize what they have, but the other thing that I find for the midwives is, do we really think the Coalition for Breech Birth developed because the mothers just suddenly decided? They were clients of midwives who said to them, you need to form an organization because that's how these things are done. And it's the midwives who help and encourage the women to stand up for their rights. It's as much our problem as anything. And when I went to the president of the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Arul, and I said to him, so Arul, this is like 2010, I said, how is the RCOG dealing with breech these days? And he looked at me with a little twinkle, he said, well, the midwives aren't doing their job. And I thought, oh yeah, right, like you're going to blame it on the midwives in Britain that their breech birth is dying. And then I started thinking, you know, he's right. The midwives need to protect normal birth. It is our responsibility to protect normal birth. And if it's dying, there's something we're not doing right. But part of that is not partnering enough with the women who want that to say, you need to become political. Like, as midwives still in Canada, we still politicize all of our clients. We tell them to join every possible organization. We've got an Informed Choice Coalition, which I put up there. We've got the Mothers of Change group worried about human rights issues. These women are standing up for things, and they have film nights, and they encourage each other. That's what happens, and that's what moves things, which is what Nicole just said this morning. Very good.